in 2022, so just 2 years ago, the American Heart Association added sleep duration as one of the metrics to evaluate cardiometabolic health. So from 2016, when we first published that paper highlighting the influence of sleep duration for cardiometabolic health, took 6 years to get to a point where we're now adding sleep duration to our metrics to evaluate cardiometabolic health.
Well, hello, everyone. Here we go again. It's time to work on one of the most important aspects of our mental health, and really one of the ways everybody listening, myself, even our guest, probably needs to think about improving their mental fitness, and that's working on our sleep. And especially today, we're going to talk about understanding the new science of sleep, how nutrition relates to sleep. What an important and exciting topic. We all have so many questions, and we're going to answer them. So we really, over the next session together, this podcast, we're going to think about sleep in hopefully a whole new way and get some great tips. We have a wonderful guest and a friend, and actually a kind of a former boss, Dr. Marie-Pierre St-Onge. She is the founding director of the Center of Excellence for Sleep and Circadian Research at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. The overall focus of her research is the study of the impact of lifestyle, specifically sleep and diet, on cardiometabolic risk factors. Dr. St-Onge has been an NIH-funded researcher since 2008. Wow, congratulations on that, Dr. St-Onge, and conducting innovative, cutting-edge clinical research, combining her experience on sleep, nutrition, and energy balance regulation to address questions related to the role of circadian rhythms, including sleep duration and timing, as well as meal timing and eating patterns on cardiometabolic risk. So, what we're all interested, like when and what do we eat to have great sleep? She has strong expertise on the conduct of controlled inpatient and outpatient studies of sleep and dietary manipulations. Dr. St-Onge was the center director for the American Heart Association funded Go Red for Women strategically focused research center aimed at determining the causality of the relation between sleep and cardiovascular disease and the specific role that sleep plays in the health of women throughout the life cycle. She is a pioneer in this field, having shared the first scientific statements endorsed by the American Heart Association on sleep and cardiometabolic health, as well as meal timing and frequency in cardiovascular disease risk prevention. She's the recipient of an NHLBI Outstanding Investigator Award and a standing member of the Human Studies of Diabetes and Obesity section at the NIH. She has also received multiple grants. She mentors so many people. And I wasn't joking, way back in the day when I first started thinking about nutritional psychiatry, I was a very young psychiatrist at Columbia. And Dr. St-Onge invited me to lecture as part of one of her master's level courses for medical professionals. And it just forced me to really build one of my first slide decks and pull together the research. And it was just really a seminal moment for me in my career. And so, Dr. St-Onge, it's such a treat to have you here on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it was just so nice to know that there were psychiatrists out there who were thinking about nutrition and diet and how that could influence mental health. So it did a great service to our students for sure.
Well, wow, your career has just exploded. I mean, you've really become one of our leading experts on sleep and on when to eat, what to eat, and how that affects things like our risk for heart disease. Can we just start right away with you sharing, what are the ways that we need to change our lifestyle to best improve our sleep?
Well, there's different ways you can use lifestyle behaviors to improve sleep. I'm particularly privy to diet because my PhD is in nutrition and have much understanding of how diet can be used to get better sleep. Interestingly, melatonin, which we all know is the hormone that regulates circadian rhythms. People take it when they have, to prevent jet lag, help them fall asleep, possibly. Well, that specific hormone is produced from a specific amino acid, which is a component of proteins. And this specific amino acid can only be obtained from food. Other amino acids our bodies can make, but not this specific one from which melatonin is produced. And so therefore, when you think about it, then this hormone that regulates our circadian rhythms and eases into sleep is totally dependent on the foods that we eat.
And the amino acid you're speaking about, I think, is tryptophan. And it's always been remarkable to me that tryptophan is one of the more rare amino acids in protein. Like when you look at protein makeups and which amino acids are in there, tryptophan's a little harder to find.
Correct. It's called one of the limited amino acids, and it's an essential amino acid.
When you begin thinking about how to affect diet and affect what we eat and when we eat, sort of, do you begin thinking about like the biochemical components or the timing, or when you began this, was there enough research, or did you really have to kind of start some things from scratch?
Well, it first started actually when the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee was asking me to comment on diet and sleep. And at that time, I really hadn't paid that much attention. I was very focused on evaluating how we sleep influences our food intake, our energy balance, our risk of obesity. And they were asking me to go the other way around. No. Can we use diet to influence sleep? And it was one of those aha moments to me. And I was just, how did I not even think of that at that time? And I went back and into the literature and evaluated some of the research that was out there in terms of epidemiological studies that had been done, and then started digging further into those types of studies myself, because there wasn't that much. But the more we started looking into this, the more we found that from population studies, those people who have better diet have better sleep. So, and this is observed in cross-sectional studies. So same point in time. People who eat well have better sleep at the same time, which doesn't necessarily show causality. But then when we start probing longitudinal effects, what do you eat now influencing future sleep, we find that people who eat better have lower risk of developing insomnia, for example, have lower risk of obstructive sleep apnea, have lower risk of having short sleep. And so now you start to get more into those mechanisms of causality.
And Dr. St-Onge, when you say eat better as a sleep and nutrition researcher, what are you looking for?
Right. So we're talking about, following dietary guidelines. Specifically in the research that we were looking at, it was adhering to a Mediterranean style diet. So this that we all know is one of the healthy diets that is high in fruits and vegetables, high in whole grains, unsaturated fats, lower in red and processed meats, processed foods, lower in sugar. Those types of diet we're looking at. Specifically, fruits and vegetables seem to come up as being important for good sleep.
Like if there's something like a food category, we talk a nutritional psychiatry about rainbows or brainbows, sometimes they're called, if we're feeling silly, right? But looking at our plate, seeing a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables. One of our favorite influencers, Tim Spector, talks about trying to get at least 30 different ones a week. Is that the type of recommendation that we want to be thinking about if we want better sleep?
Yes, absolutely. Colorful fruits and vegetables, whole grains. In one of our research, we showed that individuals who had more fiber throughout the day had more deep sleep at night, so more restful sleep at night, and having more sugar, more refined carbohydrates during the day was associated with more restless sleep at night. So we want to make sure that we get those fruits and vegetables and whole grains onto our plate.
Now, to get into maybe some of the nitty gritty, are there specific foods, like if you're working with someone or you see a dietary history, are there kind of very specific foods that people really need to have in their diet to have better sleep?
We're talking mostly about, there are some tryptophan-rich foods. There are some foods that also contain melatonin. Melatonin, interestingly, is found in vegetable products, and it helps the plants build antioxidants, anti-inflammatory mechanisms. It helps the plants grow, and also animal products have melatonin, because just like us, animals have melatonin in their bodies. And so there's actually a nice study that was done that evaluated milking cows at different times of the day and how that influenced the melatonin content of the milk in the cows. And cows that were milked at night had more melatonin than cows that were milked during the day. So anyways, all this to say that I prefer to talk about various food groups as opposed to specific foods. But if you want to talk about specific foods, we know that walnuts, for example, are a rich source of melatonin. They're a rich source of unsaturated fats. They have a healthy profile, better fiber, and there's also research on tomatoes. We talked before the recording about cherries, having research to back up that these types of foods that are being added to a diet would improve the sleep.
Well, there are a few, I think, components maybe are important to all of us that we don't think a lot about tryptophan containing foods, or when we think about them, we just think about turkey and that we're going to fall asleep. We don't think about tryptophan as an essential amino acid that's a little rare. There are great sources like cod is a great source. And I think one of the examples I give that you don't eat a cod meal and then say, wow, everybody eats cod, falls asleep. Like, whoo, boy, had cod tonight. Wow, I'm out. And so a lot of that soporific or sleepy effect, I think in Thanksgiving is probably the excess of food, often a lot of alcohol, a lot of caloric and fat and sugar and all the yumminess of Thanksgiving intake all day long. It's a feast effect,
Absolutely.
not a tryptophan effect. Is that true?
I totally agree with you. A lot of bodies in the house, it gets warm, people tend to get sleepier too. But yes.
And I think there's almost like in Thanksgiving sleeping a goal of really, almost like getting to the couch and being next to the relatives, kind of like in the food coma, or at least for some families. So, but real tryptophan is so important because it isn't everywhere. It doesn't just make melatonin, everyone. It makes serotonin first. Yeah. And serotonin is made into melatonin, I think, in the pineal gland. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of your favorite tryptophan-containing foods?
There's also, lamb is actually a really high source of tryptophan. And there's also tryptophan in some whole grains and some nuts and seeds.
Asparagus, I think is a nice source in the plant world.
Yes, but obviously plants have much less protein. The vegetables have much less protein than other food sources, but legumes are good sources of tryptophan as well.
So looking for those higher protein foods, thinking about both some plant proteins, but also animal proteins like lamb and cod and turkey, and having those be in our diet and eggs. Yeah, probably the eggs. I mean, you're the nutrition PhD. Tell us a little bit why eggs are an important or interesting source of protein.
They're a good lean source of protein. Easy to incorporate in the diet. They're actually also relatively cheap for people to incorporate. I think it's a healthy choice. There was stigma against the eggs because of the cholesterol content, but obviously now we know that cholesterol content of foods is not as much of a contributor to circulating cholesterol content levels in humans.
Well, that's, I think, such still a controversial topic, or for those of us, in the kind of medical world, still sometimes I almost have a little PTSD that I make eggs, and I've seen some of the research, and I don't eat lots of them, but I think, as you said, they're very easy to incorporate. They're very great, especially with kids in the house or older folks, where it's a great, easy protein that goes down very well and very flexible in the kitchen. But yeah, there's that fear we all have in a certain way of so much cholesterol or saturated fat. It sounds like you've kind of moved past that in terms of your thinking.
Yes, I think that we need to start thinking more about a holistic diet, and it's not just a single food to demonize, but to make sure that everything around it is healthful. So a beautiful omelet with a lot of vegetables in there is great, right? I think it could be healthful. It could be incorporated in a diet in a good way.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, and I think it's where when people say whole grains, there's almost like there's controversy and debate where it's like, no, like some delicious whole grain bread with avocados on it, or I often will have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's like whole grains and nut butter. I don't know, pretty tasty, wrong with that. Pretty nutrient dense is the goal.
Absolutely.
So we talked about a few components in our foods that directly relate to melatonin and melatonin creation. Then we're also talking that some foods have melatonin. And this is always, maybe I've had this wrong, but kind of confused me because I felt like, as a psychiatrist, we dose melatonin at 0.5 milligrams to 1 milligram is really the appropriate dose. Usually the pills in the pharmacy that people get are 3 milligrams and now to 5 milligrams. And over the past 4 or 5 years, there have been more supplements that have come out as 10 milligrams of melatonin, which to many of us feels like a mega dose. To some patients, they tell me that's really what works. Food is in picograms, as I understood, so an order of magnitude less. Does the melatonin in food matter? Have I been missing something? Are there studies? Should we be drinking dark cherry juice? My dad says it's great at night. I mean,
Right. Well, so that's where we need to have more research to know like how much of the melatonin in the food is relevant to sleep. But also the foods that contain melatonin have many other nutrients that are sleep supporting. We're talking a lot about fruits and vegetables. Polyphenolic compounds have been shown to improve sleep. They modulate the gut microbiome that can improve melatonin production as well, and serotonin production from the gut. And so I think that there's many components to these foods that probably act synergistically in a way to help promote healthier gut profile, healthier sleep profile.
It's not just tryptophan and the melatonin in foods. Those are maybe some interesting stories and some research yet to be done. But think about more of these components. I'm guessing magnesium is an important one. That's one we often see people taking for sleep in supplement form. I like to recommend the categories of beans and greens. What do you think about what about magnesium?
Yeah, I prefer your approach of beans and greens than supplements. I prefer to shy away from exogenous supplements in pill forms. I think that you get so much more from foods than individual nutrients, and the nutrients are better absorbed. They're in the right proportions for what you need. And I always worry about overdosing on one nutrient and how that can influence other nutrients in the body, and also interactions with medications that people could be taking as well.
You feel we can get it all from food, and given you have a PhD in nutrition and you've been researching this for quite a while, I find that helpful and inspiring, and not the message we so often hear. It feels like there's a kind of love of everyone recommending a multivitamin. And I think, certainly there are populations that and certainly individuals who need supplementation, but for the idea that the powerful concentrated sources of minerals, vitamins, polyphenols are our foods. It's wonderful to hear that from you and be reminded of that.
I think that's the beauty of a healthful diet. It's so much more pleasurable to get your nutrients from food sources than from pills. And I think that's also quite important for sleep. The social interactions that come from eating a healthful meal, healthy diet, can do a great for individuals' sleep and well-being.
Everybody wants to hear about the timing of meals, and I want to talk about that in just a second, just next. But I just quickly wondered your basics of sleep hygiene. When you think about really, what the research suggests, and after more than a decade of really being in the field researching sleep, what is actual good sleep hygiene?
To me, is having a constant routine. Going to bed at the same time each night, waking up at the same time every morning, trying to maintain constant duration and timing of sleep. If we're just focusing on what to do about your sleep, I think focusing on the timing will do great to get people to sleep the right amount and then to have consistent circadian rhythms.
Okay, so really be focused on the circadian rhythm. That's more important. We see so many advice like get blue blocking glasses, get an air filter machine, and a white noise machine. But really, the timing and getting our body in the habit of falling asleep at a certain time and waking up at a certain time, that's number one.
I would think so. Yes, that would be my first recommendation.
Okay, tell us a little bit about the bedroom. Are there things in our bedrooms that matter? Do we, need like some crystals in a shrine and aromatherapy, lavender aromatherapy? I saw there was some data about linalool. I mean, what's a room
if you
designed
like
for
this
sleep?
smell, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. Anything to me that would make it quiet, peaceful, restful, that helps you quiet your mind, quiet down, get into this zone where you can fall asleep readily. Your bedroom should be dark, cool, quiet. But if there's anything else that to you makes it feel like special and help you to get into a more quiet space where you just fall to sleep.
So it's a patient came in here a couple of days ago and said, "Oh, this place feels so serene," and it was such a nice compliment I felt of, trying to design a space. We spend so much time, I think, in our phones in this kind of internal interior space that sometimes we fail to remember how much our exterior space, the light, the air quality, the feeling in a room really affects our mental state and kind of can pull us into sleep. Well, everybody's wanting to hear when to eat. When do we eat to have the best sleep?
Well, I'm a big proponent of eating earlier in the day. I think for cardiometabolic health, it's a healthier way of eating to have breakfast within a couple of hours of waking up, and then not eating too close to bedtime. But I want to bring this back too, when we're talking about the tryptophan and this food coma, I guess, of people falling asleep at Thanksgiving. But because I want to stress that what you eat at a specific time is not necessarily going to induce sleep within a half hour, right? You have to think of having the building blocks available for when it's time to sleep, right? Just like other nutrients that we eat to be able to support growth and development, it's the same thing when we're talking about sleep and having tryptophan available for production of serotonin and melatonin. It's not just eating at this specific time for sleep to occur within a couple of hours. We also have to think about the food getting processed, digested, the individual components of the foods ripped apart, absorbed, distributed across the body. So I think that it's important to have a healthy diet throughout the day and not be specifically focused on eating a specific food at a specific time of day to be able to have adequate sleep. But that said, I think that having not eating and not grazing throughout the day up until the time to bed is important for good sleep.
I just want to emphasize for everyone, just to really take that in, because we get so much marketed to us, pushed to us, eat this food now, and that's what's going to give you a great night's sleep. Or I think a lot of us have had the experience that it feels some foods like give us wild, crazy sleep. Alcohol is probably an example where people report like wild dreams. Is there some correlation between like the intensity or quality of our sleeps and dreams and what we eat in any acute way? Like if I eat, jalapenos tonight, will I, kind of have that wild dream of spirit creatures?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. Last year, I was actually invited on a radio show to talk about bananas and nightmares. One of the show's listeners had asked them if there was some truth to the fact that bananas would cause nightmares. And I thought that was quite interesting. I'd never heard that question before. I'd never heard of bananas causing nightmares. Other foods I've kind of heard about, but I don't think that a specific food will cause nightmares. But you're talking about alcohol, and that's an interesting one because alcohol is a sedative, and most people think that it will help them fall asleep, which it tends to do, but it doesn't let you sleep well throughout the night. As it gets metabolized, it then causes more disrupted sleep later at night, which is when we have more REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is also then that period of sleep when we tend to dream more. And so therefore, if you have more disrupted sleep in a time where you're dreaming more, you may remember your dreams better. Now, whether these are good dreams or bad dreams, that remains to be determined. But that may be why some people might associate alcohol with more bad dreams. And then many years back, there was a fast food company that had created a hamburger for Halloween, and they claimed that their burger caused nightmares, which I also thought was quite interesting. But the burger had, an unadvisable nutrient profile, according to my opinion. And I thought that was the scariest part of the burger to me, not the actual causing of nightmares.
I want to be careful not to, in any way, challenge or harm your academic progress by being related to the banana nightmare conspiracy viral theory here. But it's something that we wonder about, and I think it shows how much we're, I wouldn't say obsessed, but interested in our sleep. I meet so many people who have been told their dreams aren't important, or they shouldn't share them, or they don't have meaning, or people who really seem to fight against sleep and sleep hygiene. I think so many people I'm going to say we are doom scrolling and kind of missing that habit and that bedtime. It's a type of, we call it kind of acting out in psychiatry, right? Where it's like, yeah, you're not taking care of yourself. You're really behaving in a kind of maladaptive way, and usually for some reason. Are there ways that the research says or kind of helps us understand how to best make that ritual around sleep that you were talking about?
Mm-hmm. So right now, I think there's quite a bit of excitement in the research field related to, as I was saying, the regular sleeping patterns and how that may be even more important than how much sleep you have, the duration of sleep that you get at night, having those stable sleep patterns. Now, in terms of various rituals, I think those can be individualized. They're a little more difficult to capture in research settings. I think that we haven't dug that deep into people's sleeping habits and lifestyle related to sleep, just like we really didn't dig that much in past years about when people eat. When we do research, population-based studies, we usually just ask people what they eat during the day without really paying attention to when they eat each meal, when they start eating, when they stop eating, and how many meals does that full energy intake over a 24-hour represent. And I think we should start doing that a lot more. What's really exciting to me is that the National Cancer Institute that manages the dietary record collection, an online system where we can evaluate people's diets, has added information about bedtimes and wake times and sleep, which is really nice because now in population-based studies, if we start using this tool to capture individuals' diet, we then also get information on what time they went to bed the night before, what time they woke up, and the timing of their meals, which will advance science.
Could you share with us a little of your research and some of maybe it's going to inspire us all to do a better job with going to bed? Tell us about the connection between sleeping and how much we sleep and our cardio-metabolic health.
Yeah, so this is, it's a long path, right? From research to policy to recommendations. You mentioned, the first paper that I was involved in with the American Heart Association to highlight the influence of sleep duration for cardiometabolic health. And then we got funded to do research to evaluate further the causal impact of insufficient sleep on cardiovascular risk factors. And I've been publishing for some of these results in the past few years, but, really showing that insufficient sleep. And what we did was restrict sleep by an hour and a half. So from people who usually sleep 7 to 7.5 hours per night, restrict their sleep down to about 6 hours per night, maintained over a 6-week period. That led to an increase in their blood pressure. It led to an increase in insulin resistance, a reduction in insulin sensitivity, really setting the stage for an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. In other studies, we also shown that cutting down on sleep leads to increased food intake. So really pushing the envelope, showing that having insufficient sleep can lead to worsened cardiometabolic risk profile. And ultimately, in 2022, so just 2 years ago, the American Heart Association added sleep duration as one of the metrics to evaluate cardiometabolic health. So from 2016, when we first published that paper, highlighting the influence of sleep duration for cardiometabolic health, took 6 years to get to a point where we're now adding sleep duration to our metrics to evaluate cardiometabolic health.
For people who are functional, I'm going to use myself as an example. I'm wondering whether I have something like silent hypertension. in the sense that I go to bed, I have a good bedtime. Thank goodness I have a great partner who makes sure, we all go to bed, turn on the lights, at the sunset and get into bed reasonably shortly thereafter. But I tend to wake up pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
And recently, as I've gotten middle age, I try to make use of this time or think about it as, it's like a nice morning with my coffee, journaling or reading. But realistically, I'm probably getting closer to 6 hours than 8 hours. Is that like having silent hypertension, that I'm just kind of perking along really with an increased risk of depression, dementia, insulin resistance, and diabetes, and I'm just kind of ignoring it?
Well, so that's the thing about sleep duration, right? And those cardiovascular risk factors that you can't feel, right? So you don't know. People say, I can get by on 5, 6 hours of sleep per night. I don't feel sleepy during the day. Maybe you don't, but maybe there's some underlying issues that are brewing that you're not feeling, like you're talking about, like the blood pressure and the glucose levels that start creeping up. Those are things that you can, evaluate through your doctor and see what's going on
I'm
there.
doing
But
I'm doing fine on all of those. I just wonder whether, it's a way,
good.
as we get into kind of a sleep habit. I think with that
Hmm.
ritual, that I used
Hmm.
to be maybe more in a 7 to 8 hour sleep habit,
Yeah.
and something shifted. I'm more of a morning person, and I just well, it leads to another question, Dr. St-Onge, about sleep tracking. Over your career, you've seen us go from all of us saying the same thing. Doc, I try and get 8 hours of sleep. Try and get about 8 hours. Go to bed around 10. I get up around 6. Then we started tracking our sleep, and now most of my patients are tracking their sleep. It's such actually a really interesting clinical tool to help motivate patients and get more accurate data. But it's been a little startling to learn that no one is getting close to 8 hours of sleep, it doesn't seem.
Right. Because I don't factor in the time it takes to fall asleep, some of the wake times in the middle of the night when they will do actually kind of wake up earlier than they expect and then kind of lie there and not asleep until they actually do get out of bed. So, having an 8 hour time in bed doesn't necessarily translate to 8 hours of sleep, maybe not even 7.5 hours of sleep, depending on how restless the sleep is at night. And so that's what we're seeing there.
What do you think about all the sleep tracking? Is it something that someone struggling with insomnia should think about?
I think it might be useful for some people, but maybe not so much for other people. If you start to obsess about what your watch says about your sleep, and that's keeping you up at night or preventing you from falling asleep because you're like, oh boy, I'm not getting good sleep at night. You wake up in the morning, or you're looking at your watch that says that you only got 5.5 hours, or your readiness score is really bad. How is that setting you up for the rest of the day? If you take it with a grain of salt and you're like, well, my watch says my readiness score is low, but I feel great. Then, and you go about your day feeling great, then I think that the more power to you. But putting a lot of emphasis on that, and if the scores bring you down without, I think maybe sometimes too much information may not be good for you. I think that it's just a temperament issue maybe, and to each their own, right?
Yeah, thinking about your temperament, I always kind of think these things come and go in people's lives at different times, to maybe gather more data and learn some things. And also, Dr. St. you're hinting at something in there, which is encouraging us to really pay attention to our body's cycles and rhythms. That, if you didn't sleep well last night, everybody listening, you probably know it. And if you woke up this morning feeling a little like, little groggy and down, you might not need an app to tell you that your quote unquote readiness score isn't as good. You know that, or that you might need a nap, or that you might need an extra coffee.
Right. And I think that knowledge is relevant, and actually just, you know getting in tuned with those feelings and not acknowledging that, okay, today is not so great. I had a bad night's sleep, but I am not going to let that deter me from choosing healthful foods at the counter when time comes for lunch. Or
Well, it sounds like that's something we should pay attention to. I didn't really know this research, but some of your research, it sounds like, really showed, hey, when you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be hungrier. Can you tell us a little bit, how do we kind of pay better attention to that, or what should we be looking for?
and everybody goes through these issues, right? Every so often we get too little sleep, and It happens to everyone. But at some point, you get to stop in and say, okay, I didn't get enough sleep last night. Is this why I want to eat right now? Is this why I want to choose a cookie? Is this why? Or am I really hungry? And then when you stop to think about what the reason is, then you can help. It could help to make better choices.
Tell us a little bit about how caffeine is influencing our sleep. So many of us love our coffee or tea, and we hear this kind of blanket recommendation, like don't have any caffeinated beverage after noon. And so I feel like mischievous when I'm having my 3 p.m. cup of coffee and hearing all the sleep experts tell me I've ruined the night's sleep, but that hasn't exactly been my experience. Can you tell us what we should understand about caffeine and sleep?
Yeah, I think that everybody metabolizes caffeine at their own pace. And if your coffee at 3 p.m. is not preventing you from falling asleep, great. But we need to know that our caffeine metabolism kind of slows as we get older, and sometimes we need to readjust. And so maybe coffee at 3 p.m. right now is fine for you, but you in 5 years might not be able to handle caffeine at 3 o'clock as well as you do now. And so just honing in and realizing, okay, well, I need to kind of move up my caffeine intake earlier in the day because now it's impairing my sleep at night when it didn't a few years
Paying
back.
attention as we're shifting in part because as we age, I hear we make less melatonin.
That too.
Sounds very scary to me. Maybe I've noticed a little of that in terms of a little harder to sleep or easier to wake up. Uh, um, but in terms of caffeine and caffeine timing, then it sounds like it's a little bit individualistic, but be cautious and note that it kind of shifts throughout our life potentially in terms of how much it affects our sleep and our sleep quality. Since you're a leading authority on nutrition and sleep, can you tell us a little bit about how ultra processed foods influence sleep? There's some individual molecules in there that sometimes seem like they're culprits in disrupting sleep, and sometimes it seems like it's just that it's a bad dietary pattern. What can you tell us about and I guess in some ways help us avoid ultra processed foods?
So there's not that much research on this right now. We're just starting to study more ultra processed foods. And with a colleague of mine at Université de Paris Sorbonne, we published a paper on this and looked at in a French cohort consumption of ultra processed foods and risk of insomnia, and found that there was an increased risk of insomnia in those with more ultra processed foods in their diet. Now, again, this was a population-based study. Ultra-processed foods are quite varied, and there's distinctions even within ultra-processed foods, right? So there's healthy versions and unhealthy versions. So I think we need to dig further into those types of issues. But obviously, a higher intake of ultra-processed foods could reflect a more unhealthy diet in general. But even after adjusting for those types of things like a healthy diet score, for example, we still found an increased risk of insomnia with higher ultra-processed foods. So what is it about those foods?
Well, it's a great start that as a food category is one to avoid. I also think you make a great point that we need to pay attention to, which is that, not all ultra-processed foods are created equal. And that there's a difference between, let's say, a heavily processed, fried, salted caramel concoction, and something that is
canned chickpeas.
Yeah, somewhat processed,
Yeah.
or even some of the processed foods, like something like a protein powder.
Right.
Where if that's getting added into, like, I don't know, a yogurt or kefir berry smoothie to boost a little protein in a population that's struggling with protein intake for whatever reason, I think that's an example of something like, to me, those are the kind of things I find myself, I wouldn't say debating with, but creeping into some of that processed food world where there's a functionality to it sometimes. And so I think it's something I'm trying to get a little bit better because I feel like there's such a bias towards whole foods. I have that for sure. And I'm trying to pair that with the reality that the population, I think I've seen statistics like up to 80% of calories are going to be ultra processed foods soon. And I'm wondering how you confront that as a researcher and someone who influences public policy and thinking around nutrition.
Hmm. Obviously, there's convenience aspect of ultra processed foods, but there's, like we mentioned, there's healthier versions of those, and there's different ways to minimize ultra processed foods while incorporating fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains into that mix. So sometimes I'm no stranger to using a freezer bag of ready-made rice with some proteins and vegetables in there. But, I put those in the pan and then add a lot of vegetables and tofu or something else.
Yeah, you're also talking about maybe convenience, some convenience items that, are a more of a processed food, right? Like a prepared flavored rice where there might be, not just whole foods in there, but then to add in a lot of vegetables, add in healthy proteins. That's a great rec. Everybody's been waiting for this question. I bet I have. I almost forgot to ask it, which is carb craving at night. Carb craving at night. Well, that happens so often to so many of my patients, so many people listening, especially when we're struggling with depression, we're up a little too late. What is going on when we crave carbohydrates?
Wow. Well, so one thing that's important to know is that we are more insulin resistant in the evening than earlier in the day. So those refined carbs that are consumed later at night are not handled in the body as well or as effectively as they would be were they consumed earlier in the day. So making sure that those cravings do not lead into later hours in the evening. And like this goes back towards our timing that we were talking about earlier, right? So ending or eating a little earlier, giving ourselves time between last food consumption and bedtime.
Well, so as a clinician, I've had a couple of theories I wanted to run by you. I don't know. I've been wondering about this because it's such a prominent feature, especially in people who struggle with depression. And one idea was that people are almost like trying to get tryptophan into the brain. That I've heard an idea that the large neutral amino acids, which compete for brain transport with tryptophan, that when we eat sugar or sugars, that there's more uptake of large neutral amino acids into muscle, leaving a higher concentration of tryptophan. And I wondered, is my brain trying to telling me we need more melatonin? and is the conversion that quick from tryptophan to melatonin? It feels kind of far reaching, but I've wondered.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the cause of the cravings at night. And if most people, when they're craving simple carbs, they're usually not accompanied by much protein.
No, I don't want the protein. It's amazing when it happens to me. No, I want toast with honey. Like ice cream's okay, but it's more of a pure carbohydrate phenomena. And I think for a lot of people, when you see, those videos when people wake up in the middle of the night in the ambient haze and they go downstairs, they're not pulling out the ice cream and the steak. They're reaching for buns and bread. And so that's where I've wondered, it feels like some very specific brain mechanism. And this, sometimes I wonder whether, if you tell us we have less insulin sensitivity, whether they're just really wanting a blood sugar dopamine rush and to end the night.
It's possible.
Well, will you share, as we have a few more minutes, a little bit about your personal mental fitness? You are a researcher. You've just had an epic last 20 years of funding, of starting a really first-in-class center at Columbia studying sleep and circadian rhythms, of mentoring people, myself included. Can you share a little bit, how do you keep it all together?
I exercise. I sleep well. I try to have a healthful diet as much as possible. I eat at regular times, sleep at regular times. But I think including exercise in there is certainly helpful. I am not in my office today, but usually if I were in my office, you'd see my bicycle hanging up on my wall. And I ride my bike to work. And this is the best. 30 minutes that I can spend in the morning riding my bike to work, no phone, no distraction, no headphones, and just thinking about my day ahead. So I get to the office, I can already know what I'm doing. I've planned it out. I know who I need to talk to, what I need to do. And that is relaxing to me, because I have a plan. And then same thing, I write back from work. I can, leave my work at the office and get a clear head when I get home.
Oh, it's such a great tip. It's when I lived in Manhattan, it was my favorite thing was commuting by bike for exactly what you're saying, and along with all of the myokines and endorphins and endocannabinoids and all that stuff that you're feeling great and have that kind of glisten and ready to go, but also the processing. And I think for so many of us who do a lot of work from home, and so many people listening, we all complained about our commutes,
Mm-hmm.
sitting there in the car, and certainly commutes can be horrible. But there's also something about how we prepare for a day and then how we process the day that's really gotten lost. And for folks I see who have been working from home, I treat some techie folks who do a great job with it. You see, they really have it, as you say, scheduled in. It's a ritual that like work ends and they leave their Zoom room. They don't just start, emailing friends or going on social or Netflix. They get out and have some version of a commute, usually like walking or exercise or
Right.
moving.
Pretend commute. Go for a 20-minute walk, 30-minute walk before getting started.
It's like a
Without a
preparation. And
phone.
yeah, I love how you said that. No phone. I mean, it's just look, it's so hard for so many of us. Part of the reason it's important, and I hope that for everyone still listening, we come together and these episodes help you is to acknowledge there is a struggle. This is really what Healing the Modern Brain, my new book is about. Of we've got to really think actively, as Dr.
Mm-hmm.
St-Onge is encouraging us about how we confront the modern world and how it's impeding things that are fundamental to our mental health and our mental fitness, like sleep. Dr. St-Onge,
Well
thank you
said.
so much for sharing your research, your wisdom. I know you've got an appointment right now, so I don't want to keep you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful episode thinking about sleep, specifically the top recommendation. You got to get your sleep ritual on point. Is with every episode, I ask you, please take something, and I hope it's that one. Usually I say pick one. I hope it's that one. I hope this is a moment you look back and you just started to honor you need a ritual around sleep, and you need better quality sleep for your mental fitness and your mental health. I'm Dr. Drew Ramsey, everyone. I'll see you next episode. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.